The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the M23 rebels have reconvened for peace talks in Doha, the capital city of Qatar. The latest round of talks follows reports of renewed violence in the DRC's conflict-torn east. The violence is seen as a regression after the two parties inked a ceasefire agreement in July aimed at leading to a permanent end to the fighting that has devastated the DRC's mineral-rich east. Under the terms of the deal, the parties were to begin peace talks on the 8th of August and finalize an agreement by August 18. But both deadlines have expired with no agreement in sight. For a look at what's transpired so far, we're joined now by Channel Africa's editor for Kiswahili service, Nixon Katembo, who himself is from the DRC. Nixon, a very good evening to you. So let's just track back to the peace talks. We spoke on the onset, or rather as they were unfolding, looking at the prospects for long-term peace, and we are where we are now. Any surprises for you, and what have your thoughts been as you've seen this happen?
I think it is not surprising the way that those talks are dragging on, and assess that in my own analysis and view that there is a lack of political will to end this conflict, in as much as people might think that perhaps that's the way the both parties the Congolese government.
Yes, you're saying the Congolese government, Nixon?
The Congolese government, first and foremost, took the case to the United Nations Security Council, which issued a resolution in earlier this year, condemning the M23 and calling for the Rwandan withdrawal of troops from Eastern Congo. And instead of following that with the effort that were being made by Angola and the Nairobi processes, which falls in part with the question of the negotiations with all armed conflict, including the M23. Instead, Congo chose to externalize the negotiations and went to Qatar together with the M23 and under the auspices of the Qatar government, which in part have trade agreements with the Rwandan government for that matter, and yet the Rwandan government is supporting the M23 as we know it. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is on the part of the Congolese government itself, with the opposition facing pressure from the opposition to going towards the elections, and therefore for President Tshisekedi having come out last year with a proposal of changing the constitutions to constitutional mandates from 5 years to 7 years, but also extending the period of the government, in other words, the president, to remain in power until 2030, or even removing the term limit for that matter. So that the nexus between power shift within the Congolese government, the interest of the president himself vis-a-vis the interest of the Rwandan government and those of the M23 are getting in a way of finding a solution to the Congolese crisis at the moment. And those who do not understand the dynamics, they think that maybe there are negotiations going on. But I think in my own analysis, and this will be proven over time, that there is no political will to end the conflict for now based on various interests. However, you should not, and maybe the listener should not, that the M23 have an upper hand in terms of military support and the military leverage, having pushed the government into critical areas such as Bukavu and Goma, where they now control a substantial amount of resources in terms of the production of coltan, and you know that coltan's world coltan in Congo account for about 70% of production of coltan in the entire world. So the M23 control that in terms of economic terms. So
Okay.
that is a leverage. At a military level, of course, they have expanded more territories, whereas the Congolese government and forces are showing some weaknesses or allying with the FDLR or even the militia Wazalendo that they are called, although the chain of command within the Congolese armed forces have demonstrated some weaknesses.
Okay, Nixon, let me jump in there because I actually wanted to bring you to the whole aspect of the involvement of the FDLR and M23 vis-a-vis, as we have spoken about, although Rwanda has denied, it's being aligned to that. And that is happening. The mass murderings are continuing in the East as a result of these two parties and others, of course. And by two parties, I'm talking about M23 Rwanda, I'm talking about FDLR, the Congolese military. But at the same time, the developments are that there are calls from the Attorney General in the DRC for former President Joseph Kabila to face the death penalty as a result of crimes against humanity, genocide, etc., etc. That particular dynamic, how will it affect what is happening on the ground and the various allegiances as they carry out retributive killings against those that they see as the enemy?
Look, it's a piece I'm on the record saying that trying the former president was a miscalculation on a part of the current president. You would know that there was a deal between Kabila and Tshisekedi, although that deal went sour, and both men have been contesting for power since Tshisekedi came into at the helm of the state in the Congo. Mind you, by Tshisekedi, by Kabila's own agreements that they say both signed. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that you, in a negotiation in the diplomatic terms, you cannot always view your enemies as a mortal enemy, and therefore there is no room for negotiations. In other words, the legal aspect in which Kabila is tried does not necessarily help the Congolese government to be able to master the negotiation and the diplomatic side to make sure that Kabila is part and parcel of the problem and part and parcel of the solution in the diplomatic sense by negotiating him and allowing him access to his own resources, such as whatever he has accumulating during his term in office and power in Kinshasa. So, and therefore, by cornering him, in that sense, it allows him to align with the M23, and therefore you saw him going to Goma, because that was the only option that left available to him. And that poses a problem in finding a peaceful solution, because by antagonizing potential partners in finding a diplomatic solution to the conflict, you aggravate the situation because you're not willing to compromise on a certain key aspect, and therefore bringing the problem to its conclusions in the diplomatic sense.
So if we are to talk about, okay, continue, Nixon.
However, if you look at now the current composition, President Tshisekedi seems to have taken a more personal view of not allowing opening up a diplomatic space and thinking that maybe the negotiated peace deal for minerals with the United States and Rwanda is going to open up a way of him crushing the internal opposition, which cannot happen because the internal opposition have to be part and parcel of the solution. And therefore, you see the initiative for a much needed inter-Congolese dialogue where Congolese in the opposition, in the armed opposition, and the civil opposition, including civil society, the church, the Catholic Church, which is more vocal in the Congo, they need to come together to a sort of a second Sun City aspect of a dialogue, of discussing the future of the Congo.
The beauty of it, Nixon, and maybe it's because we're colleagues who we understand each other's thinking. So you're taking it to the Sun City dialogue, and which is exactly where I was going to take it to. You spoke about various and competing interests, and particularly in terms of trade deals. We speak about the United States, we speak about the Qataris, and we speak about Rwanda. The cutting off at the knees of the role of regional bodies in bringing about peace to the DRC. What will be the impact of that? Relying on Arab nations, relying on the United States, whereas there should be a better interstate play in terms of bringing about peace, not involving your IGAD again, not involving SADC. How is that going to impact on a long-term sustainable peace will want to be achieved?
Sustainable peace won't be achieved without the involvement of the regional players. Congo is part of the SADC region. Congo is part of the East African region. Congo is a part of the community of Central African states. And therefore, any solution that seeks to deal with the issue of the Congo have to involve all these players in mind. And therefore, the problem with the President Tshisekedi's models of operandi in terms of the negotiations by externalizing this conflict without necessarily taking account to all regional dynamics will remain a problem, and I believe that will not solve the issue of the Congo. That's one aspect. Look at how, on the part of the Congo, they haven't even ratified the deal that was signed in Washington. Whereas on the other side in Rwanda, the Rwandan government has put through the document in parliament and ratified it as a foregone conclusions. And therefore, who looks bad? The Congolese themselves. The Congolese government itself look bad for not living up to the Washington agreement agreement of principles. And therefore, you need a sober mind within the Congolese government to understand that this cannot go on. However, what I see, I think, and I might be wrong here, that President Tshisekedi look at his personal interest instead of looking at the long-term prospect of stabilizing the country, and therefore, for him, negotiations become more personal than being about the Congolese state and its future. All That's right. One aspect, number one. The second aspect is for him to see how this protracted negotiations goes on, so that by the time his mandate ends in 2028, he's able to say, okay, now you can organize a Congolese dialogue where we talk and extend his term of office until 2030. Those has been the talks within the Congolese government circle to make sure that they extend this mandate. And in French, they have a term, they call it glissement. You remember that the president was with Kabila, whose term was supposed to end in 2016, but he did that glissement until the elections happened at the end of 2020. Right.
Nixon, we're going to have to end it here, I'm afraid, because we have run out of time, and I know we are also testing your cellular connection. Thank you very much for coming on to join us, colleague. I know you're being on the road. Nixon Katembo is the Kiswahili service editor here at Channel Africa, but of course Nixon himself being Congolese national who very much understands what has been happening. He's lived it and seen even more grave things that he's spoken about.